Motion be agreed to, and I call the member for Ryan.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise today to speak on this private member's bill, at least half of which is based on false assumptions and scaremongering from a now opposition that has not quite come to terms with the total chaos that was their previous government. Not one person in this House, or indeed the other place, denies the importance of early childhood education. There is no doubt that access to and participation in quality early childhood programs significantly improves education outcomes for students in future years, as this motion states. Queensland schools are leading the way, not only with the introduction of some years ago of a prep year prior to the traditional start of Year 1, but now many schools have introduced pre-PEP to ensure that children are up to a certain standard before commencing prep. This is only for 2 hours a week, but provides a vital stepping stone to help children adjust to the environment of school as opposed to childcare and kindergarten. So Queensland children are being well prepared for their exciting future. By creating the habit of learning early, Queensland children are setting themselves up for the future as lifelong learners. And this does not happen by accident. It happens because of quality early childhood education. Mr Deputy Speaker, it is about here that I begin to have trouble with the rest of this motion. It goes from non-fiction to fiction. In fact, it is a rather wonderfully created work of prose. The trouble is that it has much in common with reality as a magic pudding. I do understand that those opposite find themselves in a bit of a bind over education in general. They keep trotting out the fabrication that this government has or will be cutting $30 billion from education, in stark contrast to the actuality. The coalition government being the highest spending Australian government on education in history. Even ABC Fact Check has investigated the opposition claims and found them to be incorrect. Yes, there was a requirement for the review of the National Partnership on Universal Access to Early Childhood, as was put in place by the then Labor-Greens alliance. If there is any uncertainty that has been created by this review, then the blame for that lies flat at the feet of those who drafted the legislation. As we have seen far too many times in this parliamentary year, the Abbott government has had to clean up the mess left by the previous Labor-Greens unholy union. Repeal bill after repeal bill, amendment bill after amendment bill has been introduced to fix bad legislation. And here we just have another example of the lack of forethought from those opposite. The funding agreement expires on the 31st of December 2014, but Labor and the Greens only allowed a 6-month window, less when you realise that Parliament rises on the 4th of December, in which to conduct a review of a new program. And then, of course, the review findings need to be discussed and signed off by the states and territories. This takes time, as it should, but time which the framers of the bill thought they could just jump into their TARDIS and create. The coalition government offered to expedite the review, which required the states and territories to provide information in a timely fashion. Unfortunately, this did not happen, so the process was slowed again. Thankfully for the children of Australia, there is a competent economic manager in charge of the budget now. So there was a contingency reserved to cover funding should the review take longer than expected, and indeed they usually do. Mr Deputy Speaker, it also seems odd to me that the childcare rebate and the childcare benefit, both introduced as part of the family tax benefit after the introduction of the GST, have been heavily derided by those opposite. The family tax benefit has been called nothing but middle-class welfare by Labor since it was introduced. This from the same party that took 86,000 single mothers off the single parenting payment and put them on New Start allowance, making them and their families $100 a week worse off, while increasing their childcare fees by 53%. Increasing childcare fees by 53%. As a consequence, Mr Deputy Speaker, while I agree with certain parts of this motion, I find myself unable to support the gross misrepresentations presented before the House by the member for Adelaide. She knows full well the delay in entering into a formal agreement with the states and territories is the doing of her party, and therefore I reject this motion.